Good evening and welcome to Mets 360 here on Riverside. I'm your host, Brian Jora, and be joined tonight by one of the writers from the site, and that's Stephen Shrager. Stephen, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Always a pleasure to be speaking with you or writing with you or writing back to you. It's a pleasure.
All right, well, let's get right into it. The Mets are 18-7 so far in the young season, best record in baseball. I've been pretty thrilled, and I want to know what's been the most surprising thing to you about the Mets start.
Well, I know it's probably the same surprising thing that most of us would say. Clearly, the pitching has been a shocker to me. I've been one of the Mets 360 contributors that has whined about their pitching and, voiced a strong concern that I didn't think they had enough starting pitching. And that's even after, or rather before, Minaya and Montas went down with injuries. So, I clamored for a trade with Luis Castillo. Thank goodness we didn't do that. I wanted playoff experience pitchers like Walker Buehler, Jack Flaherty, but I guess David Stearns knows a lot more about what he's doing. So he proved himself correct. So, 25 games into the season, Stearns is starting to look like a genius. And their starting rotation leads baseball in ERA. I think so does their pen. And three of their pitchers right now, McGill, Peterson, and Canning, make less than $5 million. And the pen's been great, except for Edwin Diaz and maybe Danny Young. But again, kudos to Stearns. So the pitching has really been the shocker for me. I think I expected the hitting to be tremendous and the pitching to be adequate.
Well, as long as we're talking about the pitching, let's talk about Griffin Canning. And he was one of the people, I guess, that I was looking at as one of the weak parts of the rotation coming into the season. And he's been anything but that. He hasn't given the Mets the quantity, but I think the quality that he's given has been way above what the Mets anticipated. So I want to know, do you think he's going to be able to pitch this well for the remainder of the season?
I would say probably not. And I think it's almost fair to say, where exactly did Griffin Canning come from? And so, I know he played for the Angels for a number of seasons. He lost a season for injury. And, but his statistics, when the Mets first got him, his statistics were not anything that I would see being a player on our roster. He had an awful year in 2024. His one-loss record stunk, ERA over 5. He did give them, so this is the optimistic part that I noticed. He did give them 170 or so innings last year, I think over 120 the year before. So he does have the potential to eat up innings, probably poised to do 5+, which is the new normal for pitchers. Still walks too many batters, but he can strike them out. And I think, unfortunately, he might be the first casualty when Minaya comes back. And I think he's got one more minor league option. I hope he does. But I really think if he can give them the 5+ innings every time out like he's been doing, I think he's a great find. And I think, hopefully he'll be able to do that.
Do not believe that Canning has an option remaining. I think Canning and Holmes do not, while McGill and Peterson do. So it'll be real interesting to see what happens if and when some of the walking wounded like Paul Blackburn and Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas do indeed return. So let's switch from the rotation to the bullpen. You mentioned how well the bullpen was doing, but we have to be at least a little bit concerned about how many innings the bullpen is providing here in the early going. The Mets starters have been great, but they haven't necessarily been pitching much more than 5 innings per start. And it's certainly a question if they'll be able to keep that up. So how concerned are you about the innings from the bullpen?
Well, I'll take the opposite stance. And I would say, obviously, everybody's concerned, but I would say I'm really not concerned. The way baseball has evolved, teams basically now expect their starter to go maybe 5 or 6 innings, and that seems to be the new normal now before they turn the game over to the pen. So that leaves the pen needing to get, 9 to 12 outs, which is big. And, and Stearns has assembled a bargain basement relief corps. I mean, 5 of their players on the roster, that are in the pen make less than $1 million a year. So I would suggest that maybe the players are making the most of their opportunity. I think all of the relievers on the staff have at least 9 or 10 appearances, and they've all pitched to pretty microscopic ERAs except for Diaz and Young. So the sarcastic part of me says maybe they just, putting on their big boy pants and decided to be more like pitchers from the last generation that I remember who could pitch more than 1 inning at a time and pitch more than 1 day in a row. So while I am concerned with the mounting innings, I don't think you're going to see 6 relievers who are going to give you 80 innings. But I'm pretty encouraged by what I see. So, I think I'm a little concerned with the innings, but it's too early, and I'm just going to enjoy the ride while we can.
So one thing that I looked up was the actual innings pitched by both the starters and the relievers so far. The relievers have 95 and two-thirds innings after 25 games, which works out to about 620 over the course of a 162 game season. And that's about 100 more than what the relievers gave last year. Now, that's a tiny bit misleading because it wasn't it wasn't evenly distributed over the course of the season. The relievers actually pitched less, starters pitched more as the season progressed, and we certainly hope that we'll see something similar to that here in 2025. But I don't think that they're going to be able to keep up a pace of 620 innings over the course of a season.
I think that once they get a little bit deeper into the season, what I think we saw last year is the Mets starters. Of course, there was Severino and Mania. They threw a lot of innings, and Senga looks healthy. So I think between those pitchers, McGill, Peterson, they have shown the ability to go longer. If we can get some of these pitchers to pitch into the seventh inning, they're going to help the pen quite a bit. And I think we're going to see that a little bit more as the season goes along. I hope so anyway.
One of the advantages of 2024 was that the Mets were one of the few teams, perhaps even the only team, not to use an opener all season long. And we've already seen them use an opener the day that Griffin Canning was sick.
Right.
Oscar Brazaban got the start in that game and he only pitched an inning. So that may be slightly skewing what we've seen so far. The bullpen had to cover 8 innings in that game. So hopefully we won't see too many more like that going forward.
I think the Rays were the first one who came up with a bullpen game, or at least the first one in my mind they did. And they did it very successfully. I mean, the Rays are a great organization, great front office, really can pick players out, sort of like David Stearns can do. But I've never really thought it was a great idea, the bullpen game. Gives everybody some time, but I just think it's a recipe for, if you got to use 6 pitchers that day, you're in a lot of trouble for the next couple of days.
All right, well, let's switch over and talk about some hitters. We've got a big question mark coming up with the imminent return of Francisco Alvarez. And we were all very concerned when he went down with the injury, wondering what we were going to do with the catching position. But Luis Torrens has ended up being a really unexpected, pleasant surprise offensively. And we're at the point now where we're almost worried about taking playing time away from Torrens. So how do you see the playing time being distributed between Torrens and Alvarez?
Going back to last year, Torrens was a breath of fresh air. He's never going to be the hitter that Alvarez could be. Hitting. Last year I think he hit around 230 and OPS around 700, but his value was really behind the plate. I mean, he caught a great game. He had the confidence of the pitching staff, and boy, could he throw out runners. His backup this year is Hayden Senger, who again, another player that I looked at the beginning of the year saying this guy does not belong on a major league roster. And he'll be the casualty to go down to Syracuse. I hope he's got it. He probably has to have an option. He'll be the one to go down to Syracuse when Alvarez comes back. But I see Alvarez obviously as the starter, strong catcher, hits a long ball, really stretches out the lineup if he's ends up hitting in the 6 or 7 spot. And I do see Torrens, getting a start a week. And maybe if Alvarez is hitting the ball and they don't want to take him out of the lineup, he can certainly spell Marte at the DH every once in a while. But I really see Torrens pitching a game a week. Maybe Alvarez is young, but maybe a day game after a night game, just to keep him fresh, because it really is a strong asset on that team. Not just a backup that you hope you don't have to go to, but he's a backup who really can play.
A start a week is a pretty standard split of playing time between the starter and the reserve across MLB. You mentioned the day game after a night game, and that's typically where it happens. My expectation is that we're going to see Torrens more than that. I think we're going to see him 2, and it wouldn't even surprise me if we saw him 3 times a week. I think the Mets have been really impressed with what he's given so far, and they want to make sure that they don't drive Alvarez into the ground.
Yeah, and I think that certainly can happen. That's why I kind of threw in the ability, if he's hitting the ball, but they want to get Torrens in and let him. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of take a day off from the field, but get in there and swing your bat. I don't know a major league player that doesn't want to hit, and I think that Alvarez, if he's hitting to get a day off behind the plate, could certainly be a better option. than Marte at this point, notwithstanding his bloop single to win the game yesterday.
Speaking of major leaguers who like to hit, let's talk about Jeff McNeil. Last year, he had a 547 slugging percentage in the second half of the season as he transitioned from a guy who used the old wee willie killer adage of hit them where they ain't to looking at hitting the ball with authority. So that was something that I really appreciated because I thought it was something that McNeil needed to do in order to maximize his ability. So I'm kind of bullish on McNeil when he does return here in a couple of days. But what kind of numbers do you expect from him in 2025?
Well, notwithstanding that it's an odd numbered year when he generally doesn't play that well, I think his slugging percentage for the second half of the year was a mirage. He didn't reach that point when he won a batting title some years ago. I think if he can slug at 460, it'll be good. But I think he's got to hit around 275 or above because that's as good. He's a good hitter. And I'd like to see him hit about 15 home runs, even though that's more. He's only exceeded that total once. He'll displace Luis Angel at second base, and so I'm saying, oh well, that's terrible because this guy's coming on. He can steal bases, but I think that if McNeil comes back and he's hitting, we know he can field. We know he can play second base. He can play a corner outfield position, but if he's hitting, there's no way they keep him out of the lineup. And again, given the composure of the lineup, he's going to be hitting towards the end, which again is another opportunity to lengthen this lineup. I've always liked Jeff McNeil. I always think he's scrappy. He definitely was one who made use of that ridiculous shift, just punching the ball the other way, as we've yelled to him to pull the ball, get some power on it. So I look for him to come back, notwithstanding how he's done well in his rehabs in the minors, but I look for him to come back and step in and hit the ball. But I don't think he'll reach how he did the second half of last year. I think that's just an unrealistic pace. But if he plays to the back of his baseball card, he's going to be a great addition back on this team.
That year you referenced was 2019, and it was 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, where he really focused on pulling the ball and hitting the ball for power, and he did really good. And I was excited about what he might do using that as a jumping off point. And I'm not sure because the following season was the COVID year and everything got messed up because of that, but he completely went back to spraying the ball, hitting the ball to left field, looking for soft singles, kind of like what Marte and Acuna had in yesterday's win. And he never followed up on that until the second half of last year. And unfortunately, he ended up getting hurt. So I guess we still have the question if he can remain committed to that approach of, I'm not going to worry about where the ball goes. I'm just going to worry about hitting it hard. And I think that if he does that, he's going to be successful.
When he was hitting further up in the lineup, close to the beginning, I think it's a whole different mentality. Like when Nimmo's leading off, he's trying to get on base. When McNeil was hitting higher in the order there, it's a different mindset. But now if he's plugged back at 6 or 7 or 8, let's see him swing the bat and not ground out to shortstop. I agree.
So let's step away from the 2025 Mets here for just a second, kind of switch things up a little bit. I want to know, have you ever asked an MLB player for his autograph?
I got to tell you, so it's really kind of funny. So I've done it twice, and it was in the same day. I always thought, one, and it wasn't at the stadium. And one time I got seats from a friend of mine, and we were actually sitting behind home plate, actually near like the on deck circle for the opposing teams in these very cushy seats. This is back at Shea Stadium. And I was like, you're standing next to the player. But I was a father with both of my kids there, and I thought it was a little childish for me to ask for an autograph. Digressing back several years ago, a few times I played golf at the Otesaga Country Club in Cooperstown. And I went with a group, and they did it a lot more years than I did, but went with a group the day before the Hall of Fame induction. So each time out on the course, there were lots of MLB players there. And I got Willie McCovey to sign a ball I just happened to have with me. And, boy, was he an imposing figure and one of the greats from my childhood, but always living in the shadow of the other Willie. So what was crazy was the only ball I could find in my house that was not beaten up was a new softball. So it's kind of weird, but I got his signature on it. So then a little bit later in the round, there's Reggie Jackson. Well, okay, now that's more of a current star than Willie was, but he just looked at me, made a face, and walked away. So maybe if I was a little kid, and not someone in their 30s at the time, he would have obliged. But so it's always so I lost a little bit of respect for him that day. I realized, he was out in a golf course. He didn't really want to be bothered, but then don't play near other people. So, but that incident, obviously, that incident has stayed with me for many, many years. And those are really the only two autographs I ever asked for.
Oh, that's a great story. Now, when I went to the games as a young kid, we always sat up in the top deck of the stadium, so it wasn't really a chance to get autographs when those are your seats. But then later on, when I was a tween and a teen, I ended up getting box seats, pretty much up the right field line, but they still charged you box seat prices. But anyway, we would get there early and hang around during batting practice and yell at everybody who walked by, whether we knew who they were or not, asking them for autographs. So I got quite a few autographs from coaches and career minor league players.
But you never know who's going to turn into something.
Yeah, exactly. So one year, and I can't remember if it was 1980 or 1981, I want to say it was 81, program, they switch the covers of the programs multiple times a year. But on this particular day, the program featured a really nice picture of manager Joe Torre and essentially his pitching coach and Bob Gibson. So I got Joe Torre's autograph and spent the rest of the day trying to get Gibson's. And he was not exactly friendly, shall we say, and might have said something that we wouldn't say here on the podcast. So I think that was the last time that I've ever asked anybody for their autograph. But I did get a couple of autographs here in the 21st century. And one was a reader sent me a card that had a John Mayne autograph. And the other one was my sister, who used to work in the financial industry, was at a conference. And Oral Hershiser was working for this company that sold bridge loans, which if you're a Mets fan for a while, you know that the Wilpon took out one of those to cover expenses at one. So anyway, my sister got Oral Hershiser's autograph on a ball and gave it to me. So I have had some recent autographs, but I didn't ask for either of those.
What a nice person. Probably about maybe 5 years ago, I was speaking at a conference in Syracuse, New York. And for whatever reasons that I really can't get into, Darryl Strawberry was the keynote speaker at that little event. And so afterwards, you could spend good money to get buy this or buy that. So I really wasn't inclined to spend all that money, but he did sign something I had on me, a picture of the two of us, so I thought that was really cool. But so that was interesting. So he's and of course, Strawberry in my day, sitting watching the 86, 85, 86 Mets was a great star. And unfortunately, another career that could have gone, like Doc Gooden, could have gone to the Hall of Fame, but they kind of self-destructed for lots of reasons.
Well, that's a real nice autograph to have, especially for a Mets fan. But let's bring this back to the players on the current team. And one thing you hear a lot about is people referring to Francisco Lindor as the team captain, even though he doesn't officially have that title. So how important do you think it is for the Mets to anoint him as the team captain?
I mean, do I think it's important? No, but they don't have a captain, and I think he'd be a great choice. You can't name Alonso because he's on potentially a 1 year deal and could be gone. Nimmo's the other player who's on a long-term contract, but not really captain material. I think Lindor has evolved into the leader of this team, the straw that stirs the drink, borrowing it from another player. I think he would be thrilled to be named captain. I don't think anyone on the team or any of the fans would protest. I mean, when he gets off to a slow start, we're all yelling, "Oh, there he goes again. When's he going to start?" Then you watch what he's done this year so far, and you say, I'd have no problem making him the captain. I can't think there's another player on the team who I would.
Pretty much with you on this. I don't really think it matters very much, but it is an issue that a lot of fans feel very passionately about. And one thing that I believe I read somewhere online, and it's turned into what I think is going to happen, is later this season when they have the jersey retirement ceremony for David Wright, I expect there's going to be some official changing of the guard, and Wright's going to unveil Lindor as the new team captain.
Well, that would be kind of a classy way of doing it. I think that it's like June 19th, May 19th. It's one of those days. This is, and I've already got some friends already got tickets, and that day's essentially sold out. And again, a little slow to the game getting a ticket, but I'm still 3 hours away from City Field, so it's a little hard just to pick up and go. You got to really plan it out.
All right, well, let's transition from classy to crazy,
Okay.
which means it's crazy idea time. I'm going to give you an idea that I think is crazy, ask you to comment on it, and then I'll ask you to give me your crazy idea. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, my crazy idea is a guy that we mentioned earlier, Frankie Montas. My crazy idea is that Montas does not make one start for the Mets in 2025. So, how crazy is that?
Wow. I think it's a bit crazy, because he will come back. He'll make a few starts. And I think if I'm hearing what you're saying, like he'll make a few starts and he'll go down with another injury. I think it is a crazy idea because I think it would be such a departure from David Stearns and his being able to look at talent. But again, I think it's crazy. I think he will make more starts. Will he make a lot of starts? I'm not sure. But if he is making a lot of starts, it means he is the pitcher that Stearns hoped he would be. And again, we got to displace someone else. So yeah, a little bit of crazy idea.
Well, that pleases me because last week neither David nor I thought that the other's idea was crazy. So I'm glad we got a crazy on the board. All right, hit me with yours.
All right, so here's a crazy one. It has nothing to do with anything important. So if you could go back in time to when we all thought that we'd be Major League Baseball players, and
Last week?
of course, be playing for the Mets, what position would you have wanted to play and why?
I don't have an immediate answer for that. I grew up with an empty lot across the street from my house, and we played from morning to dusk in that empty lot and played every position depending upon who else was available to play. And we played full games of 9-on-9, and we played games of 2-on-2 where you could only hit to one side of the field. So little more well-rounded, and because I didn't play any kind of organized ball as a kid, I was never like pigeonholed. You're fast, go play in center field, or you're tall, go play first base. I didn't have anything like that. So I don't know. My favorite player was Duffy Dyer, so maybe I would have been a catcher.
Love that. And it's such a draw from another place to pick a. He wasn't my favorite players, but I thought Ron Hodges was the most brilliant Met because at one point he was making about $500,000. He rarely played. He shut his mouth, and I thought that was brilliant. I said that would be me. You know, I played probably through American Legion ball a long time ago, and based on what I played, I fancied myself as an outfielder, but I had no speed, so that kind of hindered me. I didn't feel comfortable in baseball playing the infield. I played it in softball and was very good at it, but it was just too fast in baseball. So I realized probably when I was 6 that I wasn't going to play Major League Baseball, but it was still nice to think about.
All right. Well, let's also continue on this theme of using a type of revisionist history. No, so knowing what you know now over what's happened here in the baseball season, what move do you wish that the Mets would have made in the offseason?
Well, I thought the center field position going into the season was one that they were hoping that their coaching staff and their hitting lab and any magic could get the most out of Taylor and Siri. They were both incomplete players. But the reality is while we all want an all-star at every position, there's nothing wrong with having where a position where defense wins out over hitting. That used to be what shortstops did. They were very strong defensively. They didn't hit much until great players started in those spots. Early on, preseason, I wanted to get a Cody Bellinger or a Luis Robert Jr. or a Michael Taylor. They all seemed very strong defensive players with histories of, being good hitters. But, again, I've said before, David Stearns is a lot smarter than I am. And all three of them are off to just horrible starts this year. Like they're hitting under 200. The OPS is in the toilet, and they make a lot of money. I mean, the lowest one is Robert, who makes about $8 million a year on his deal. And that's more than Siri and Taylor combined. But as I looked over the lineup, and I know we're waiting for some players to come up from the minors when they're ready. Center field was one that I thought we were not getting as much as we could while we're spending someone else's money. So I would have liked a stronger player in center?
Yeah, it's a really tough question to answer because, maybe you can point to an individual here or there who isn't performing, but the team is 18-7. How much
Yeah.
more could you possibly have wished for? So I don't even know how I would answer this one. I do know that I was of the belief that the Mets should make a trade for the guy that the Red Sox picked up, and that was young lefty Garrett Crochet. But with as well as the pitching has gone, I mean, it's really tough to say so far
Yeah,
that Crochet would have made such a difference.
I mean, yeah, it's so we're both going for like the named quantity. When they didn't pick up one of the other pitchers who both overcome injury, but both were on playoff rosters and performed well. We all sit back as armchair, well, I'd say quarterbacks, but it's not as armchair managers. Confident that we know a lot more than the baseball people that we're watching. It's so easy to second guess. But yeah, so a little disappointing. But you know what? You're right. 18-7. What more could we possibly want? But I think if our pitching had pitched the way they were probably supposed to, we'd be lucky to be 500 now. So I'm happy to ride this wave and say, let's go beat the national, whatever. Let's go beat the net. Let's go beat the Diamondbacks. Let's go beat them all until we run into a team that we really shouldn't be beating, which I'm not sure that really exists right now.
All right, well, we have time for one more question, and I want to ask you a theoretical roster construction question. And Major League Baseball rules say that the most you can have is 13 pitchers. But if that rule didn't exist, what do you think would be the number of pitchers that you would carry? Not what David Stearns or anyone else would do, but you would carry on the 2025 Mets. What would be your pitcher hitter split?
So I think the split between and the requirement that you can't carry more than 13, I think the limit on pitchers to me is as stupid as the rule requiring a reliever to face three batters or the ghost runner or not being able to step off the rubber too many times or limiting the throws to first base. I just feel that there's so much about managing a bullpen that comes down to if you've used three pitchers to get out of an inning, you might leave yourself really shorthanded when you get to the end of the game, or might end up having to throw a position player in extra innings. And a pitcher who throws over to first base a lot simply tires himself out. So then I looked at the current roster of hitters, and with a number of catchers, number of infielders, number of outfielders, I'm not sure that we would really want to go with less than 13 hitters, regardless of how the composition will change of this catcher or that infielder or Azakar leaving and someone else coming. So I guess I'm okay with the 13-13. I just couldn't pick one position player to dump to add a 14th pitcher, even though, as we look at how short the pitchers go in their starts, if you had 16 pitchers, you'd probably be in good shape.
My football team is the Vikings, and their old head coach was Mike Zimmer, who was a really old school defensive guy. And for whatever reason, he loved cornerbacks. He would draft cornerbacks all day long if you'd let him. And somebody asked him, how many cornerbacks do you actually need? And Zimmer's answer was just one more. And I feel like the same thing kind of applies to pitchers. If it was me, I think I would do a 14-12 split, and it would be real easy for me with the 2025 Mets just because I'm not a fan of his. And I would say goodbye to our pal Starling Marte and replace him with a pitcher.
Interesting. So, I mean, they certainly have, I always say that the corner outfield positions, and particularly left field, because I played there, are the easiest positions to play on the team. I think left field is the easiest position. So you could put someone out there, and especially if you had a Jeff McNeil who was healthy, he could play outfield on a regular basis. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of Marte, at least not soon. But I was trying to figure out which player you would dump, and then does that leave them one outfielder short? Or I guess if somebody gets injured, we bring someone up from the minors.
Yeah, there's always a solution to that kind of thing. Well, that's all we have for you tonight. I'd like to thank Stephen for dropping by and spending some time with us and talking about the Mets. Hopefully, when we have Stephen back on again, the Mets will be something like 36-14.
Oh, I'm hoping for better, but I'm just an optimistic, crazy person. Brian, thanks very much. It was a lot of fun.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.